Hello, and welcome to A Weekend with Good Friends, a convention hosted on the Good Friends of Jackson Elias Discord server. I'm happy that you could join us today for our panel titled Yes and Improvisation of Scenarios, from one-line hooks to 4-hour adventures. My name's Miranda. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be moderating our panel today. And don't worry, the irony of this intro being scripted is not lost on me. You may recognize me as a cast member and storyteller over on the Old Ways podcast, or just from my lurking around various Discord servers under the username Don't Stop Me Now. But that's plenty about me. Let's get to know our panelists a little bit, and we'll start next to me with Becky.
Hello, thank you ever so much for having me. I'm Becky Annison. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a game designer. I've designed Lovecraft-esque and Wreck This Deck and Bite Marks, probably all of which you've never heard of. And I'm one half of Black Armada Games, and then I will gracefully pass on to better people.
And we also have with us Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Sellers. I am a designer and publisher of my own games at Hectic Electron Games. I made Raccoon Sky Pirates, and before that, some supporting material for other games, and I'm working on a queer sword and sorcery adventure called Defy the Gods.
And on our bottom row, we have Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Tracey, also known as Doc, in pretty much every Discord server you'll find me in. I tend to pop up there quite a lot in just about everything with some variation of Doc in my name. I write scenarios for the Miskatonic repository. I've streamed some games on Twitch, including improv games. And yeah, just love games.
And last name first, Newman.
Absolutely. I aspire to be like a Prince or Madonna type figure. I haven't got there yet, but yet being the keyword. I'm C.A. Newman. I'm the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse. We, as an actual play podcast service, we take Miskatonic repository scenarios and we surprisingly play them. I'm also a writer, 3 best-selling scenarios, and I've got my future first campaign book coming out at some point. I look forward to when we do this in a year's time and I go, I've got a campaign book that's coming out at some point. So we'll see when that actually does come out. Yeah, thank you. Oh, pronouns he, him.
And last but not least, Rina.
Well, I'm Rina Haenze. My pronouns are they, them, and you probably know me from the Old Ways podcast, where I am the head of Mythos Horror, all things Cthulhu, and a cast member on Coriolis and Horror on the Orient Express and a bunch of other things. You may also know me from Ain't Slayed Nobody, where I'm main cast member on Down Darker Trails, the Old West Cthulhu show that we do. You can also find me on sometimes on the Miskatonic Playhouse, sometimes on How We Roll, on Symphony Entertainment, and a few other places. I do a lot of gaming, including improv gaming and storytelling. And you can find my scenarios for Call of Cthulhu on Drive-Thru RPG for the Miskatonic repository, including my gold bestseller, Saturday the 14th, and a few other best-selling scenarios. And you can find me on Discord just about anywhere as Rina, or most likely the inevitable Rina, as I'm known in most places.
So, improvising in tabletop RPGs, it's a big continuum, and we do it in every game, whether it's, describing a player's success or failures, or it's taking a thread that you didn't expect your players to pull, but, you did say there was a vase on the table, and for some reason they won't shut up about the vase that's on the table, and now that vase has a backstory and a mythology all of itself, and now we're playing a game about this vase that I said was on a table because I was trying to describe a room, all the way to one-line hook and running a whole scenario, a whole 4-hour con session with just one line and getting input from players. So I just want to start out by asking kind of what is your personal experience level and comfort with running improvised scenarios and improvising in games?
I tend to start all of my scenarios with what I call my 3 bullet points on a napkin. I don't go into running a scenario with a full scenario planned out. Almost every single game that I do, unless I'm collaborating with someone else, I have 3 things written down on a Post-it note, or my first game was literally a napkin. It might be 3 words, it could be a sentence in a couple of words, whatever, and then I go from there. I literally have 3 things. and I improv an entire game around it based on what the players do. And then, of course, it'll evolve into a full scenario from there as I play it and play it more. But the first time I run something, it's always improv based around those very 3 little bullet points on my napkin, post-it note, whatever. So that's how I like to do things. And I've run games that are completely improv as well, with nothing starting from the beginning. Just like, okay, here we are. Audience, give me some stuff if we're doing a Twitch stream. But improv is my favorite way to do things personally.
For me, I think what Rena's saying there is, well, firstly, admirable, because that's not an easy thing to do. I think if that's something that you find easy, that's amazing. I think a lot of people would kind of go, oh, bloody hell, wait, what? And resort to that kind of like, I need hours of preparation and I need to read the book 17 times and then tattoo all the clues all over my arms. And I quite luckily able to kind of bounce between the two. I do feel the comfort of having like really prepared for a scenario and then go rogue during that time, letting the improvisation kind of roll out in the moment, and then realizing you didn't use 3/4 of all the stuff that you planned and prepped, and that's fine. You can just cry about that afterwards. But I do love. I think Rena's right. You know, there is an excitement and I think an originality, like an experience you're never going to get again. If you get that really high level improvisational aspect, it's very much a this is in the moment, feeding off the energy, feeding off the players, having a kind of a vibe, I think, and it's brilliant. You know, I was lucky enough to be in a improvisational game that we ran at the last year's UK Games Expo, and the only cues we had was that the keeper had the Call of Cthulhu character deck and monster deck and tome. They're like cards. They're like a pack of cards. Essentially, it was just you walk into a room and the first person you meet is boff. Card was down. And it was like, okay, and we all had those cards for our characters as well. We had to pick one at random to be our investigators, and that was, I have to say, just huge amounts of fun. I don't think it was a very serious game because we all just went for the fun improv interpretation, but it was great, really, really good.
I think that you said something which is really key there, which is looking for the players. You know, I think that one of the things with when you're doing improv games that is so important is where are you getting your inspiration from? Because it's not coming from your pre-prepared scenario. So where are your sources? You've got your 3 clues on a napkin, but your players are an amazing source. I think as GMs or keepers, we often feel like we've got to carry the whole of this 4 hours on our backs, keep everybody entertained. And if there's like 5 seconds of silence, that's us failing as a GM. And I think that's just so not true. I prefer games. I think improv games work best when you enlist or co-opt the players to be your co-conspirators. You know, I don't know what's in the room. I'm going to ask a player, well, what do you think's behind that room, behind that door? What do you think's going on? You know, and by asking your players questions, you can kind of gather up more material to feed what it is you're going to say without having had lots of stuff written down already.
I'm going to add to that. There's something I actually do in the start of my games. I've stolen lovingly from Rina that instead of having the typical who are you playing, what do they look like, I ask my players, what do you think of this other player? Why are they your best friend? What did they do to help you in the past? I actually ran in a game last night where my players were kind of taken aback for a minute that, wait, you mean to tell us it's not in our character sheets? It's up to us. And whatever you say is completely canon for the next 4 hours. If they saved your life in the war, how'd they do it? And it really created an interesting thing because by giving the players that level of agency, they had a higher buy-in to, I now said this thing that is true, I need to make it interesting for me. And it kind of took me out of the hot seat a bit from those 5 seconds of silence.
Totally. Yeah. I love it. It's so much. Every time I go back to a game that needs you to not improvise, maybe because there's a highly structured mystery and people need to get the clues in a certain order, you know, it feels, like so much more responsibility on me as a keeper, and then so much more risk of things just going, of the ball being dropped, you know, if it's not gonna, like, that you fail to say the right thing and then things screech to a halt, or they say something and it goes off, you know, it goes off the rails. So I just love the improv, because then you're not bound to specific things happening.
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on the next question that I have for you. All is what do you enjoy about improvising in games so much? Like, what does it bring to the table for you? And I personally, I totally agree with Matt that it takes you off the hot seat a little bit when you can have player. The onus is not entirely on you to create this adventure, but it's you put that on someone else a little bit, and that's kind of nice when your brain gets fatigued. And yeah, but what other kind of things do you enjoy about improvising in games?
The energy. I think just like this adrenaline rush from the players leaning into things and seeing where they take whatever it is you come up with and then volleying with them back and forth and creating a story together. Like, there's just this huge adrenaline rush for me at this kind of co-creation, especially the first time I run something or when I'm just doing a non-scenario, completely improvised game where it's just, we are creating this thing together that never existed before, and it's never going to exist in this specific form again. And just that we're making this, and it's fun, and we're doing things together, and it's not just me telling the story, it's everybody else really adding all these details. And like, they just made up an NPC. I want to go talk to the nurse. Like, okay, well, there wasn't a nurse before, there is a nurse now. Or
What's her name?
I want to look at the book. Her name is Anna. So there you go. And all of these different things that they keep me on my toes for when it comes to the game, because they will ask, okay, what's that person's name, and I have to come up with a name, or I want to talk to a random person and I have to make up a person who was never there before, or a random tome because they went digging in a library somewhere. And just the energy from the table co-creating and the energy I get from having to be on my toes so much, it's just there's nothing like it for me.
I completely fall on that. As I think that's brilliant. I think Rina's actually kind of rounded that off really, really, really lovely. When teaching this, we talk about opportunity, and it's about that improvisational aspect is you're creating an opportunity to invite somebody to get involved. So the worst thing you can do with improvisation, unless you're the keeper and you have a specific reason, but even then, is to say no, isn't it? It's to kind of it's like the title of this, we joked just before we kind of went online, going yes and no. You just shut everything down. You kill any movement, any interaction, any shared narrative, the experience. It just dies on its arse. And that idea of opportunity, it might be someone doesn't pick it up. It might be that somebody else picks it up in a rogue way, like Reena was saying, and that's really exciting to kind of go, oh, okay, kind of drop this thing as I was thinking you were going to pick it up, but you've picked it up, and that is a very active, reactive situation. And I think for everybody, Reena's there talking about the energy of it, and I think that is so crucial to improvisation. And that invitation, that opportunity. If you're improvising within your role playing, you're creating things for other people to get involved in. I don't think there's anything more probably disturbing around the table if someone starts improvising and it's just for their own character's needs. It's a bit like, ooh, should we come back? What's going on here? Should we say that idea of opportunity?
Do you want a moment by yourself to play out the scene? Yeah.
Let us know.
You take narrative. I'll come back to you.
Yeah. I love the egalitarian aspect that it gives to our games. That the GM has so much power in a traditional game, and I think all story games do a great job of this. But the way it devolves authority to from the GM or the keeper to everybody, is like I think it sets up a better power dynamic around the table just from the start.
I love just being surprised. I think when you've got a scenario, maybe the players will attack it in a way you weren't expecting to, but I think one of the real joys about a fully improv game, and I mean really fully, kind of going back to what you were saying, Chris, where there is no GM and there is no keeper, and you're playing one of the games which distributes GM control. Maybe there's a rotating GM spot scene by scene, or the creative control is divvied up in different ways. But the joy of being surprised by something that you just completely weren't expecting, but which fits the story so perfectly, I think that's the real key for me. That's what I love the most.
I always love just how you never know where it's going to go. I mean, even in a written scenario, you could have a scenario that's just pure sandbox of here's 17 locations that your players can go. After 5, end the stream. And I always have one player, I have to give him a shout out. This every time I've run a game for him, he's found one location that is not in the written scenario, not in my notes, and forces me to be in the hot seat of improv an entire scene of something that I had zero prep for, wasn't even on the radar. But it's that to me just makes it fun because I don't know where it's going to go, and I'm the one running the scenario. Because I want to go to the library. I said, I didn't plan for a library, but okay, we'll take the subway, go to the library. And just kind of touch on what Rina said, it does create something that never exists again. Because the odds of somebody wanting to go to that library under the exact circumstances never going to happen again. It's that lightning in a bottle feeling. It just feels great.
And then in a really improvisational situation, it's not like they say, oh, the library, and then you have to say, okay, we need a 10-minute break, so I need to build up this library. You can be like, okay, you go to the library, and you say 1 or 2 interesting details. There's stone lions out front, there's old dark-stained wood around the entrance, and you go in, and there's a librarian there. What does she say? Or what books are you looking for? You can throw it back to the players so they can build some of it, just enough for you to make things difficult for them, for their characters. I mean,
well, I was love to just throw the "What would you like to do? Welcome to the scene. Go." And they would go, "What do you mean? We get to decide? Yeah, you're in a library now. What are you going to find?"
Yeah.
I think that's something that new GMs or keepers, when they're prepping a scenario, you're nervous, you're reading everything 3 times, you're making your notes, you are preparing a finite setting, a finite amount of possibilities that your players don't know about. So they're going to try to think of all these little things that they could do, and the person that wrote that scenario, or while you were prepping, you don't even think that your players are going to want to go to the library or talk to this person, or can I talk to their aunt? Can I get their aunt's number and talk to me? I don't know who that person is, and so that is always going to come up, and you can really build a richer experience by letting them do that. Find a clue somewhere that you can put in that place. The clues don't have to put something there for them. Make it worth their while for them to have thought of this thing.
I do feel that's now should be a comedy sketch where you've got some players in the GM and they go, I'd like to go to the library. Nope. Try again. Oh, I'm at the bar. Nope.
I mean, you say comedy sketch, but that was like so many of the games I played in the 90s.
Right,
that,
right. Teenagers kind of going, it's not on the map. No, sorry.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
God, just the other day, running a game here for this convention, I had to be like, they're like, okay, we want to find the address of this one character. I was like, I really don't have an address for that. I don't have anything at their home. Maybe something else. And like, it's totally a fail, like in exactly this way. So I say all in the 90s, but like I just did it yesterday. So that's bad improv. Put something at their home.
But also, if you're running a game for a convention, sometimes that level of improv, it's got to be redirected. And I suppose that's the job of the keeper, isn't it? It's the players. They're not signing up to go, yeah, let me redirect the role play, unless it's constructive and really works. But as the keeper, you are those. What do they call them? The inflatable things in the bumper lanes when you go bowling. You kind of, I suppose, a bit of railroading, really, isn't it? But very gentle with improv, because if you kind of went, yeah, let's go to the house, and you've got a convention game and you've got a time limit, they're not going to get the experience of the game. I think that, I think sometimes that can be like, actually, there is nothing at the house. It's just one of those moments, isn't it? No, try again.
Yeah.
But that keeps them in the game, doesn't it?
Yeah, I did move a few things around, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
You
I
can
was
work with
gonna-
that by having an inciting incident that drives them away from.
Yeah.
Like I had it come up in a play test of a scenario where players wanted to leave the main location and go somewhere else, even though it was super late at night, and they wanted to look for this one person. Like, okay, so all of a sudden you hear this shattering sound coming from down the hallway. It sounds like someone's down there, maybe breaking in. And so then they instantly went into the mode of, oh, we need to go see what that is because we're investigating this area, and what if they're stealing something? Or someone's coming in trying to get the information we're after. And so that redirected them from, we're going to go find this NPC who doesn't exist, into staying in the location and continuing on the plot. So you can create something, a little bit of pressure in that moment, but create something to either keep them there or move them to the next place without it feeling like you're shutting them down from going to talk to this other person or going to this other location.
I also feel like for convention games, kind of what Newman was saying about the whole time frame, I always look to have a ripcord of whatever happens, I need to have an instant out that I can wrap everything up in 30 minutes. If I know I have to be done in 4 hours, at 3.5, if they're going to find that NPC who doesn't exist and they've ignored the crashing sounds to investigate, I just take all the clues and I put them elsewhere and say, okay, here's how it's going to go. Like,
You find a box sort of labeled investigators.
Well, last night when they went to the library, it was getting to be about 3.5 hours. I'm like, okay, we're getting kind of close to the end here. I want to give it time to breathe. And I said, okay, you go to the library, you do all your stuff there. And then something happens that triggers the end of the scenario to this final scene. And they go, well, I didn't see that coming. So that's the point. You're not supposed to see an end coming. Even in a fully improv game, there was one for Symphony Entertainment where we're doing an improv 1 hour sonata, as we call them. And I was being pitched this terrifying scene of these tiny baby dolls crawling towards me in an abandoned hospital. I'm freaking out. My nervous system's here. And then it just ended. And I'm like, what do you mean? There's nothing more. No, that's it. Hour's up. And that was probably the most fun I've had doing full improv because there was no next step. Everything was written to order, and I just sat there going, but the tiny baby dolls are going to eat me. Yep.
I do like that as an ending thing. I do think that not everything should be answered. I think someone else was talking about that in one of the panels earlier today or maybe yesterday. I do quite like that, especially if we're playing mystery games. You should I feel like you should be going away going, what about that thing? But obviously that's an extreme example, Doc. But I think that, again, that's a really good, fun way to play. You don't go away from that game going, I was cheated. You go away from that going, I'm going to remember that.
So what, as someone that's maybe getting into improvising scenarios or just starting to improvise more in games, what about improvising makes it difficult? Like what is someone getting into it going to have to deal with? What should they be prepared for?
Names.
Oh,
Everyone's
worst.
going to be Ted or Anna or something because you're going to have a couple names that you go to. They're going to ask you for random names of NPCs you didn't intend to be there, and you're just going to have to come up with them off the top of your head.
Yeah.
That's the biggest issue that I tend to have is, okay, this is Ted. Well, we've already met a Ted, all right? This is Tedward. I don't know.
And if you're playing a historical setting as well, that can be, that's definitely worth a Google. Doing a lot of Regency, I can safely say that making sure that you've got the right title for the right random NPC that comes up. Are they a lord? Are they a viscount? Are they a mister? Are they, if they're the second son, then they wouldn't be this, they'd be that. And it's just having a little bit of that knowledge in there to then go, right, I think I've got this bit of the social structure down. I can now do exactly the thing that Rena's doing and have a even probably a pre-generated list of character names that you can just poke at and cross them out as you go, so you don't make sure you've got 15 Teds all in the same room. Saying I'm the real Slim Shady. It's there is, I think that's a really good bit of advice actually with the names. For improving for me as well, I think, this is again down to the type of game people play. Like if they wanted to play like this, I like to do a lot of character stuff, and I know that's a very me thing. I've been in some of the best games I've ever played in, have had zero character stuff in. It's just been, a shared conversation. But I personally like to do quite a lot of character stuff. I think as the keeper, if I was new and I was GMing a game, I definitely have a few of my PCs that I try and do either something physical or vocal for, maybe. Nothing massive, just something for me almost. So I kind of know what they sound like, and I know that they're a bit different to the other ones that I'm doing. But as a player, I think also be really generous with your keeper, because if they're working quite hard to deliver some of this stuff, whether it's voices or not, whether it's, however it's done, I think a little bit like the yes and, be really generous with your keeper because they're running the narrative. They're the PlayStation and you're the controller, which I don't think makes sense as a metaphor, but I like it. I kind of like it.
I think that the biggest pitfall is failing to recognise it's a skill that needs to be developed like anything else, and assuming that it's part and parcel of the GMing or keepering that you've been doing all along. It's not. It's a completely different skill that needs to be built up, and the more time you spend exercising that muscle, the more comfortable you'll become with it and the easier you'll find it. There will always be a moment when you're exercising that muscle and learning that skill where you will go completely dry, and it will be painful and it will hurt, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means you have to keep practicing, and I think that's the main thing that I would say to people. It's a matter of practice. And how to practice? Well, I would not start by improvising an entire horror mystery from start to finish on my very first outing. I would start by improvising chilling details or NPC details, things which were not critical to a plot line that could derail a mystery. And then I would edge more and more into mystery territory and plot territory until you're already there. But don't think this is something which everybody can access on day one. It's just a skill. You just got to learn it.
Yeah, and kind of complementary to that is that sometimes you'll get a player in the group who is not ready for that, for improvising their bit, and you pass the ball to them and they drop it, and you got to work with that, and that's when maybe you step into a bit more of a traditional keeper role where you do have more control, where you feed them more stuff, or you find what little thing they do know about their character or are willing to offer back, and kind of build on that, But like it's almost like you're moving at different speeds with different players, and working with their different styles. I think that has been hard sometimes.
Sue has just put in the chat, it's brilliant, that she loves the term GM buffering. I think that's wicked. That's cool.
I was also going to add, actually, that one of the things that I think possibly doesn't help people in this day and age, and I know there's lots of actual play people here, and I'm on an actual play myself, but when we consume a lot of actual plays, particularly the ones which are not streamed, I think there is a sense that, Matt Mercer's just making this all up whole cloth from his head all at once. He's not. Even the people who are doing a lot of improv on their APs, particularly if they are episodic ones and not streamed, they're going to be edited. There was probably a really difficult 10-second pause while the keeper or the GM was coming up with a name, and it just got edited out. So it felt seamless to you, the listener. And one of the things that I like to say to people as often as I possibly can is, don't think that that's you, that's how you should be performing as a keeper on your very first trip out, because what you're listening to is probably edited and you're getting a distorted view of what you need to be doing and what it's like to learn this.
It's like, with whose line is it anyway? You see a 30-minute show where every single sketch and every single bit hits. They film for 2+ hours to get that 30 minutes. And it's always time to go back to what you were saying there, Becky, about how getting the right levels and everything. Getting into improv takes practice. You're not going to jump in on the stage and be Colin Mokry right out the gate. And flexing that muscle, a lot of people I feel like get discouraged early on because you ask for a name and they come up with 25 TEDs and they go, I can't think of a name, I can't do improv. But maybe you had a TED, then a fad. make that one minor little change, and next thing you know, you've got an entire lineage of Teds that are all just slightly different and slightly improving with those. You need to take that
It's a
GM
family
buffering
name.
moment. The family,
Yeah.
yeah. Ted the First, Ted the Second, Ted the 15th, King Ted,
Theodora, the one.
Theodora.
100%.
That was
Someone
rocking
had
the
a
boat.
daughter. Yeah.
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 Think of it as a muscle. I think that's a really good takeaway from this moment, Becky. That idea, it's like a lot of the skills you use either as a keeper or a player. The more you do it, I think the more refined. I think the more probably you get a sense of it from your own personal tastes as a player, as a keeper as well, and perhaps the people you play with and the people that you naturally kind of find yourself in circles with. There's going to be like a shared learning curve with that as well. I know that. I mean, my background is in acting and performing, but coming into this environment, there's different takes on things, significantly different takes on things, and I think that's an important thing. Is that your own taste, your own trial and error. It's gonna over time, like anything, it's gonna refine that practice for your tastes as well as your tables.
And something that can help is when you're first learning, is when you're starting off with improv in your games, whether it's just those little details like you were saying or getting into improving larger chunks of a scenario, is to have a table you trust, whether you've played with them a lot before or you've run games for them that weren't improved before, whatever it is. That's how I started. I had a table with people I'd played with multiple times, and I trusted them to be able to pick up on what I was doing. It was the first time I ran Saturday the 14th, my first scenario, and the table included Scott Dorward. And I knew that the people at that table were going to run with whatever I gave them, and they were going to give me a lot back. I knew there wasn't going to be a whole lot of awkward pauses, a whole lot of, wait, what? Or, you want us to do something now? Kind of things, like playing with a random group. And that really gave me the confidence to start the improving. And so playing with people you trust is really important, because improv is about trust, right? You have to trust the people you're working with in order for it to work. And so starting with people you really know and you really trust will help you build those skills in a safe environment, and a fun environment as well, so that you can eventually branch out to being able to improv with people you don't know as well, or people you completely don't know, like in a convention game.
Yeah, to tie kind of some of the things that I'm hearing from you together a little bit into another question is that player piece. And so I think Chris touched on it, but also thinking about it in terms of improv being a muscle that we have to work on, and that it's not something that always comes natural or that you can just start doing and being great at, and it's something that you have to work on. When you come to an improv game, there's two sides of that table, and the players are often expected to improv along with the GM. So how do you get your players involved? How do you keep your players involved and keep them building and adding to the story? Because I feel like sometimes when I'm running a game, especially if it's one where I want the players to give me more, that is a barrier that needs to be broken down. I don't have the story. I need you to give me some of it. So what are your tips and thoughts on getting and keeping players involved?
Choices. Giving people several different things to choose from and then running with it from there. Whether it's several different people they can talk to, or a couple different locations, or you're at this state fair, you see XYZ, where do you go? You're at the retirement home for bingo night, and you see Phyllis, Grace, and Phoebe doing XYZ. What do you do? Z. And you do all these little things where you give them opportunities to pick who they want to talk to, where they want to go, what objects they want to interact with, and then you can riff from there. But it gives them a little bit of a structure, so especially for newer players who are coming out, or players who aren't as comfortable with the improv aspects, then they have a little bit of structure to pick from, and they don't feel completely like, okay, you're in the state fair, what do you do? It's like, no, you're in the state fair, you see these 3 places to go, or these, 3 people who what would you like to do here? And then they can pick from those, and they're more likely to give you a lot to work with, because then they'll feel like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to Phyllis at bingo now. Okay, what's your relationship with Phyllis? Okay, here's what we're gonna do with Phyllis now, etc., etc.
Yeah, and that's
Oh.
like the genius of pick lists is that you like the GM gets to give players choice without giving them a completely blank slate, which means you get to control. Ahead of time that that you're kind of controlling what the options are, and they don't have the terror of the blank page where they just have to where they freeze because they already have some grist for their mill. Now, having said that, there's a player I frequently play with who is lovely and he's amazing, but you give him 3 choices, he will pick the 5th one every time, and that's cool too. Like, I don't think he's ever had the terror of the blank page, but I think of games like Becky's brilliant game Bite Marks, where you have a strong holding environment, a strong container, and the pick lists are all really evocative, and then you just give that to the players, and they run with it, and every choice they make is going to be good because you set that up.
I like I think going across across games, across systems, that idea of improvisation with that, and I think Rina really clearly set out the choice X, Y, and Z. Here are your opportunities, and really in a really clear way. I think to bolt onto that as an add-on as well, if you've got a player, an investigator or character, whatever it is, whatever system you're playing, and they're showing an interest in something by taking their lead and following that, and pulling that into the scenario, I think that can help with the blank page fear as well, because if they're into something and you're kind of going, okay, there's this, and then all of a sudden, if you're, you really like the look of that chemistry lab, you hear a window smash and you see Rina running into the shadows. That's the thing, isn't it? You don't go there, don't go. But you take the thing that they're interested in and you turn that into an improvisational opportunity to build back into these narrative routes and lines. I think they're like narrative ley lines, aren't they? And if you can kind of cross them at certain points with some improvisation, then there's a really lovely moment, A, of shared narrative, and then B, hopefully, of some kind of good role play conflict.
Gosh, you're all much more generous with your players than I am. Maybe I've just been playing too many GM-less games, but I'm very much of the school of tell me who is that NPC over there and why are they looking at you funny, rather than here are 3 lists. But what I would do, I suppose, is twofold, is that firstly, it's got to be context appropriate. If I am billing myself at a convention as running a straight up Call of Cthulhu scenario, I am not going to expect my players to come sleeves rolled up, ready to take over GMing halfway through, and I would not, if anybody ever sees my name on such a list, I would not expect you to do that. But if you are going to go down the road of asking people more pointed questions and expecting them to add more flavour, I think that the blank page thing, I've got 2 tips for that. The first one is something that I read in the Second City Improv troupe guys. I'm pretty sure that they've written a book about improv that I read many years ago, and I think it's their book rather than the Keith Johnston one about improv where I got this tip, but which is always go with your first thought. Don't sit there trying to come up with something more clever than your first thought. If your first thought is Anna for the name of the NPC, just say it. Don't sit there trying to come up with Euphemia or something like that. Eventually, your brain might just go straight to Euphemia, but for now it's Anna, and that's good enough, because that's better than sitting there for 15 seconds feeling awful. So that's what I say to people. And the second thing that I do to really encourage people, I suppose, reward them, if you like. I don't know if that's a patronising way of framing it. But if your player comes up with a really cool detail that wasn't in your scenario, firstly, I'd be like, that's amazing. I hadn't thought of that. That's so much cooler than what I had written down. And then hopefully, if I remember, like 2 scenes later, I'm going to do a callback to the thing that they said, because nothing feels better as a player than having the GM reincorporate something you said 2 scenes ago. Like, I cannot tell you what a buzz that is going to give you as a player. And if your players get that buzz, then they're going to want to like invent more stuff. It's a virtuous circle.
I love the idea of rewarding those choices the players. I honestly, I'm going to start doing that more now because I'm a big fan in improv things of not just saying you're here, here's X, Y, and Z, but also giving them. I mean, maybe it's because I'm a chemistry professor in my daily life, but a small stakes, maybe zero-sum game choice of just what color is that person's hair. Just little things there to get those juices flowing a bit, because you can't start every improv game going zip, zap, zop. You want to get your players that juice flowing of just maybe it has a consequence in the end. Like one of my players said, "Oh, my character's afraid of the dark," and I said, "Okay, so I said, when you're traveling somewhere, I'm guessing you're probably not gonna want to go down that dark alley." Like, "Oh, no." I said, "Maybe you want to take this well-lit pathway that's totally not going to go somewhere terrifying." And just giving them the small choices, I feel like it helps the players build up what they're doing in the improv. Like I said, working as a muscle, it's their warm-up, it's their 5 minutes of cardio. But then also, you can take those little tiny choices and just twist them a little bit, and really, really scare them a bit. In a good way. In a good scare.
This that touches on something, Matt, that I wanted to talk about, and that as we got started, I thought about, which is improv and horror, because so often improv goes silly, it goes funny, like that is the easy place to go, and it's kind of where our comfort level is a lot of the times. So how do we improv horror? How do we keep it terrifying when it wants to veer silly sometimes?
Vocabulary. Like reading horror, especially when you're going into more cosmic horror, reading up on some descriptions and things, and just building your vocabulary and keeping it so that you can bring out the phrases or twist the phrases, change the phrases, take a bit here and a bit there and put them together to make this, oh god, what is that thing, suddenly come together. It's if you're trying to keep the horror for creatures or for monsters or whatever, having those descriptions in your toolkit is really going to be useful for just pulling them out of the bag when your players run into them, especially if they come into something that that critter wasn't supposed to be there, but it's there now because that's where you went, or they accidentally summon something, which has happened in my games before, things like that. So having the vocabulary for horror descriptions, and even going into landscape descriptions, going into talking about people, using adjectives and adverbs and so on that really are evocative, you need to have those language skills. You're not going to just be able to pull them out of a hat if you don't have them in the hat to begin with. So that's part of the prep of improv, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it really isn't, because we all use things that we already have when it comes to our improving, and using the language for horror is no different.
Just to jump on that, I think that's the vocabulary is such a brilliant kind of thing to invest in for anybody in any part of their life, but especially if you're looking at prepared or spontaneous improvisation. If you're playing, using improvisation, the way to further this idea as well is think about your players and as investigators. It's no different from when I play a computer game and I'm playing the character in the computer game, but I'm still me and I'm still playing it and I'm getting experience. So if we can talk from a human point of view in terms of what people see, it doesn't have to be a human description. It doesn't have to be something they understand, but using the senses, using things that we can twist and turn so that we first of all begin to, someone says to me, "You smell this acrid smell." I'm going to go, okay, I know what that is. I can connect to that. But then if they start to change things about the smell or the way I see it or the sound that I'm hearing or the way something feels, these are human things, but we can make them preternatural. We can make them beyond the normal, which you were taking something fully expected that we would presume to all have an understanding of, and kind of move from there. Yeah, we could all say, if I was to say now, the smell of petrol, I think we could all probably go, yeah, we all kind of know what that is to us as well. Some of us like it, some of us hate it. I personally love it. It's probably why sometimes I just stare into the distance. But I think that idea of, you say something like the smell of petrol, but then you can say, but within that smell of petrol, there is a manicured sweet smell underlying that's drawing your, it's you take something that's established that we know and then you kind of riff off it, I think is the underlying message of what I'm trying to say. And I think the senses are a real good hook into people, because hopefully it is people at your table. Otherwise you've got a serious problem. You've got another problem, which is an improvisation.
They've definitely taken the familiar, making it unnatural, really gets under people's skin in the best way. Especially if they think it's something safe. But maybe not the smell of pepper, maybe the smell of a birthday cake. You smell a birthday cake. Oh, birthday cake, happiness, happy thoughts. And then layer something ominously underneath it. I feel like a lot of improv is, we don't know what's coming, but you got to expect the unexpected to make it then further unexpected.
I would totally agree with that. I also think that it helps to, in all of these things, to try to make it real, like keep it emotionally authentic. Like there's that great horror fiction podcast, Pseudopod, and the host Alistair would always say at the end of the intro, and it's real. And like that being the most horrible thing. And so if you can think of the horror scenario or whatever scenario you're doing as on some thematic level that really matters, this is real. It gives it stakes. It makes it hit home in people's lives, and it makes things really intense. And when you do that, or any other way that you create a horror mood, if you build that intensity, you have to give a release at some point, so people can like laugh or do whatever, even if it's sort of nervous laughing, and then you can build it up again and get to that intense moment where everybody is in it. But I think it helps to be like, you just put real things in it, an unloved child, a shitty political situation, anything that will, just like Newman was talking about, like pinging a chord that resonates with people sensorially. You can ping a chord that resonates with them with emotions that they're familiar with, moments that they've had, within the bounds of everybody's safety tools, of course. But like then I think it can get real fast.
Playing
I think
with
I might add
absence
as
too.
well that
sorry.
where you have a situation where you have built this and everyone has agreed we're going to sit down and play a horror game now, and through the improv aspect it has spiraled off into something more comedic, I would just say, oh, that was really great, guys, but this is a horror game, so if we can just dial that back down, and then I'd probably hit them with something disgusting, like really disgusting and visceral, to kind of really shock them out of it. A kind of almost, riffing off what you've just said, Chris, they've had this tension release moment at the table, sort of pseudo, almost out of character release moment where we've all got a bit silly with the improv. So I would just, as a GM, I would say, right, we're going to move away from that now, and then immediately hit them with something really, really horrible and dark to kind of pull them straight back in, and almost use that as part of the cadence of the game and build it in. But I would never at any point feel shy about saying, well, we're here for a horror game, so that was cool, but we're going to move on, because I'm that sort of person.
Also adding to the making things real and playing with reality is playing with absence. What isn't there? Like there's one of my scenarios where the absence of nature sounds is important for the scene and for building tension, but also just a clue that something's very, very wrong. You're outside and you're in the woods. There's no birds. There's no insects. There's no squirrels. They fire, one character at one point fired a gun off. No birds went flying off into the air. There weren't any rabbits running around. No mosquitoes. And it's summer in Maine, right? What are the things that aren't there? That's a way you can really build into the horror aspects as well, because those expected, those familiar, those things that we connect to, when they're suddenly not there, we feel lost. So if you can give those little moments, like what's not there, you don't hear the water running.
Yeah, I once read a paper by a scholar who was talking about the Gothic and talking about elements in horror, and they made very precise definitions of the eerie and the uncanny, where the eerie is that there's something that should be there that isn't, and the uncanny is something that should not be there that is. And I think both of those can be really strong. And you know, I think Rina's thing is like a really interesting direction to take Newman's suggestion of it's still a sensory picture that you're creating, but then you make them imagine sensorially the absence of a stimulus that they were expecting, and then they hear that silence, and it can be really powerful. And then with the uncanny, you know, you like, well, like Becky was saying, you know, you go with something disgusting, or you like something that really does not belong, and it can be really cool.
So with everyone adding things with the player's ability to create and add things to your game, because we found our great aunt Theodora's family heirloom vase in a brackish cave now, how do we create a cohesive story with what our players are adding and what we're adding in these different avenues that are maybe veering off of what we intended or what we started, or, you know, even if, like, for me personally, I go a start point, end point, and I just try to get between the two. And so how do we create a cohesive story there?
I think it's a holding environment. I think you create a basket, and that defines so much about what you choose to put in and what you choose to leave out. And then whatever players do within that environment, it will be going in a productive direction. And story games do this really well. You know, Wander Home is mostly bucolic, but they have these references, J. Dragon, to the slobbering god in there. And like every other playbook, you know, has a little thing about that. It's like it points the players at each other, and the holding environment points people in the direction that you want them to go.
I think also just keeping in mind a couple things that must happen and making sure those things happen, working with what the players do and how they play in that space. And you have to be flexible with making those things happen, as we've already discussed a little bit in this panel. If they don't go in the direction you think they should go, they go somewhere else. You have to be able to move that event, that player, that NPC, that whatever, to that location or in that direction. But having a couple specific things in your head, this needs to happen, or this should happen, and then your end game. My end game is always one of my 3 bullet points on my napkin. Always. Here's where they should end up. And it's not a full built out, this is the big final climax, this is exactly how this is going to happen, etc. It's just, okay, they need to be here with this NPC who's going to turn into the monster, or they need to be in this room at the end, or they need to be at this location. And then what happens from there you can play with. But it's easier to create that cohesion when you know a couple places where it's going to go, even if you have to move things around a bit while playing in order to get there.
Yeah, I think the events that kind of need to drop those kind of key scenes and things, obviously how they unfold is completely dependent on the investigators and the shared narrative and the improvisation. But I think, you know, it is okay when you get to those moments if 1 or 2 of these things that we've all wonderfully improvised together drop or don't make it or aren't a part of the, you know, the thing, because whether you're convention, whether you're running a campaign, whatever your scenario is, it's, you know, not everything can be in it. Obviously you attempt to try and look after your players as much as possible, but also you have a responsibility to deliver a story and deliver that experience. You're not dictating what the experience is, but as Reena says, if your last bullet point is we got to get here because this is the kind of the end of the experience that you've signed up for, you got to get there. And if you drop a couple of things on the way, well, that's fine, and that's normal life as well, isn't it? You know, it's not everything needs to have its own epilogue when you kind of get there. Some things can disappear and be a part of the thing. And I think we all mentioned earlier as well, kind of nice sometimes having a few little mysteries unsolved as you get to the end, because again, that's kind of cool in a mystery game.
I got to touch base on that third bullet point thing, because I love not having the ending fully fleshed out. Because if you have an end game of, like, the bullet point of they go to a room and the bad guy appears and that's all you're going from, there's no requirement for your players to find clues X, Y, and Z, or find the book that has the weakness of a monster in it or something. It's completely open-ended, and it gives the freedom to do whatever they want. If whatever they found informs that ending. Like, maybe they found a clue that could help them win, maybe they don't, and they all die. But that would be the satisfying ending if you didn't find a thing that helped you kill the monster. You didn't find Excalibur laying on the ground to slay a dragon. So having that third bullet point is just the setting is... I love that. Because if you go in with a set ending, you're going to railroad your players to find all your clues.
I was going to talk a little bit about Lovecraft-esque, if that's okay, which is a fully improvised cosmic horror game from start to finish, where you improvise collaboratively at the table. There is no GM, it's GM full, when everyone gets to take it in turns, just GM scenes, and everybody, when it's their turn to GM a scene, introduces a clue. And the way that we have tackled it in that game that we wrote is to say that at the end of every scene, everyone spends a couple of seconds writing down what their conclusions are, where they think the mystery's going, what they think the kind of the horror is at the end of it all. And then after another couple of scenes, you've had another couple of clues come in, you can just, holding your original theory quite lightly, you can update it a little bit. And this means that kind of as you go, you're kind of folding in the new things, maybe discarding things as red herrings, as Newman alluded to. But it does kind of allow you to kind of keep a kind of a running check on adapting what your theory is all the way through.
Yeah, I think those kind of mystery investigation games where the solution is the explanation is not laid out ahead of time, like Lovecraft-esque, are really radical. Just talk about like changing the power dynamic between GM and players, keeper and players. You know, to hold your idea of what the solution is really lightly and let the players come up with the ideas. I think that's awesome.
So the title of the panel is Yes and, which is probably the most commonly cited principled method of improv. What are some other methods or principles in improv that you find yourself using during improvised scenarios?
Like to do is the quote-unquote audience suggestion, where, like, especially when I'm doing a streamed or live game, I'll get the audience to throw things at me like, okay, where are we? All right, we're at a company. Okay, what kind of company is it? What do they sell? And then I'll pick one, like scenes from a hat kind of thing. But even when I'm running it for, like, off camera, just running it for friends or a group on a server or in a convention, I'll get them to throw some things at me. Like, okay, so you're not you're players, but you're not your characters yet. You're gonna give me a couple things, and I'm gonna weave them in together. All right. So, you hate your boss. Tell me your boss's name. Okay. All right. What kind of company do you work for? Why are you all stuck at work at 9 p.m. on a Sunday right before Christmas? What is the thing that brings you here? Okay. We got our scene. I'm going to run with it from there. That's my favorite one.
I like the one Becky said earlier, which was dare to be dull. You know, say the first thing that comes to your head, because what seems obvious to you could be really inspiring for another player, and usually is. You know, like, don't try to out clever yourself. Say the first thing that comes to mind and offer it, and other people will make something amazing out of it.
I was just thinking, my brain is stuck in when I'm teaching improvisational skills to young students, because I think that's quite a nice way to think about it. And yes, and of course that's the always the go-to. It's like the number one. But it's not really something that we do. I would do in a scenario or anything like that. Maybe if I was, I don't know, Rina and I have played a few times together, and we often kind of jokefully, playfully, I hope playfully, target each other a little bit, and there's a bit of banter there back and two. And I think I'd feel really confident doing this with Rina. But again, it's a confidence in the technique. There is a technique which is just essentially one-upmanship, where it's almost a bit Monty Python silly after a while. And I think, again, like Becky was saying earlier, and Chris has mentioned the kind of the tension and suspense journey as well. If it gets a bit silly, you need to reground it, but it can actually be quite good fun. And I think if it's done, I would say that yes, and the kind of one-upmanship, you can afford to fail at it, and have fun with it and do it in character. And I think that is the fun as well. Sometimes is, I think one of my favorite things with Call of Cthulhu, and if you listen to the Playhouse scenarios, odds are you're going to listen to one where I either die or do something really stupid, or potentially turn on the other investigators. None of which are usually my kind of initial what I'm trying to do. But those are also my favorite kind of games, because they're totally unexpected. And I think that idea of that spontaneous, oh, this has popped up, I'll jump on that as well. And then if somebody else is on it, you're kind of creating that kind of co-journey to move on there. If they're not on it, you go with it. You might be able to feel whether it's working or not. I'd say as a bit of advice perhaps to players and to keepers is that if you feel or sense that something isn't working, either drop it. If you're worried, if you're running the game and you're worried that a player might be into it, but you're going to kind of drop it, talk to them as well. I think Becky mentioned earlier about kind of saying, right, we're just going to pause here. Let's remember we're playing a horror game and get back to it. That was a lovely kind of break. Let's get back into the vibe now. I think it is okay as well to stop and check in with people and kind of just go, are we going to pause this because it's getting a little bit crazy and we kind of want to get back to this. But they might go, actually, this is really good fun, and you go, okay. It might be that if you've got the desire or the skill to do that, that'd be great. But I think the one-upmanship, it can create not just opportunities for players, but it can create a bit of fun. And I think, Rena, if I think fondly of when Hedge ran you, me, and Cosmic through, I think it was one of Heinrich Moore's scenarios, and there was this
Great trap.
The great trap, thank you. And there was just this kind of like playful one-upmanship, and I think on my part it failed quite a lot of the time, but that also didn't stop us doing it, and we kind of went through the scenario just building to this. And I think for me, that's the memory that I take away from it, was the fun that I had with the interplay between investigators, with that spontaneous kind of improvisation that we did.
I love with the one-upsmanship, you can also make sure you commit to the bit. Because if you're going to be constantly one-upping and trying to, taking the yes and to yes and, you want to make sure that it ends somewhere satisfyingly. For instance, if a player unexpectedly finds something or describes what you didn't plan for, like say maybe they see a suit of armor and decide to say it has a halberd in its hand. Okay, you've just given your player a weapon. Now where are they going to go with that? And then maybe that same player decides in the climax of the scenario to spend all of their luck to impale and kill another PC. I can't imagine anybody committing that much to the bit. Newman, would you know anybody who would do something like that?
Apologize. I'm going to apologize that one for a long time. I think that's one of those moments where,
at the same time, I didn't have a halberd written in on any of my notes. I actually had the chat look up the stat block for me live on stream. Like, I don't have the numbers handy, but because it was a commitment to the bit of I now have a weapon. He turned into John McClane, like I have a machine gun, ho ho ho, and it challenged me to say, okay, how can I then balance this that he now has a halberd? But when you have that one-upsmanship, committing to the bit really needs to happen. I feel like I agree with Becky's kind of about, Don, we are in a horror game. Be aware, be forewarned, like, this is meant to be scary, but also the players should have that agency of their decision sticking. So, okay, you now have a halberd, now the enemies are going to be ready for somebody that has a ranged polearm style weapon. Or maybe it just happens to go through another player.
This reminded me of something that I've seen Nate do recently that I've made note of. Your friend Nate on most servers, he's my friend too. And that is that when a player describes something, and I'm tying this directly to horror, but something that I've noticed lately that I want to do myself more is that when a player describes what happened, we have them describe the action, he'll say, yes, but it's worse. And then he'll describe how it's worse than what they said. So maybe they're running and they failed their run roll and they describe, tripping over the curb and falling, and he'll say, yes, but it's worse because you hear a pop and you realize that you've dislocated your shoulder. And so he pushes it slightly further than what they've described as the action and kind of builds onto that. And I think that's a good way to help get players involved too, but amping it up a little bit, especially for players that aren't, for me personally as a player, sometimes it's hard for me and for anyone to just come up with that stuff. So
I love that so much. I also want to kind of mention why yes but, because I think kind of hanging a bit of a lantern on why yes but helps you avoid a really massive pitfall, which is don't throw the other players under a bus. Because improv works because we all trust each other to build on each other's ideas and to take each other's ideas and treat them seriously and do callbacks and reincorporate them. And the reason we do yes but and we don't just kind of cut ideas off dead is because A, that's not very interesting for the story, but B, if you cut somebody's idea off dead, if you say no, if you have invited improvisation from your players, you get it and you cut it off at the knees, you will never get it again. And that is missing out on such an amazing thing. I think there's a really good example, I think from the Second City book, where they talk about two, one now quite a famous comedian on stage together doing a skit together, and the guy says, but what about the children? It's a fully improvised skit. He says, but what about the children? And she fires back, what children? We don't have any. She gets a great laugh, and he never trusts her to improv with him on stage in front of those people ever again. She got the laugh, but at actually quite a cost. And I think it's worth kind of being cognizant of that. It runs on trust, so don't break that.
Trust is in essence the yes and, it's the starting point, isn't it? Because that's the whole thing, isn't it? If someone goes no, it's like, oh right, yeah, I think that's brilliant. The trust idea. It's okay to make mistakes, 100% okay to make mistakes. Drop the ball, get it wrong, try again. But that trust idea that you've got someone willing to kind of go on the journey. That's a really important one. Yeah,
it takes a while to build up. It takes no time at all to lose it.
Yeah, absolutely. I ran a game of Deathmatch Island at the start of the con, which as it sounds, there is PvP in it, especially at the end because there can be only one winner. And an interesting way that they handle that is, you roll to see who wins, but then the person that dies has to essentially consent to the death you have described. So if you describe something that isn't good enough for them, then they can say, oh, but I do this. And then you have to describe how you then come back around and kill them in a different way. And it was actually really fun because the player that was killing the other player described their death, and the player that was dying said, no, that's not, like, he wanted a more horrific death. So
keep going.
So he said, no, I do this. So then the player had to then come back around and actually describe something worse. But I feel like it's built in there for just comfort of, if someone is going to kill my character, I want it to be something that is meaningful for me, but also something that I'm comfortable with. And I haven't seen that in a game before. And so I thought it was just a really interesting way to build on the improv, but also have that comfort and consent between both players.
Oh, I love
probably
that.
Worth sorry, you go.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say it's probably worth quickly mentioning there's a lot of story games and GM-less games out there which have codified different elements of improv actually into the rules and into the mechanics of the game and into the way you set the game up, and kind of drawing from them is a great kind of tool for your own toolbox.
Yeah, there's one game that says, I forget which game it is, has a GM asked the player, what is the worst thing you could find here? You know, like what is your character fear could happen here? Like what's your worst fear about how this role goes? And then they give a result based on that. Like,
Yeah.
and players get into it, you know, once you learn how to play to lose. Sorry, what?
Oh, I know Public Access does that. I'm not sure if I know it's like built on Brindlewood, so they might too. Where if you're going to roll, what's the worst thing what could happen, and asking the players to put that out there. Yeah.
Then you throw in that it gets worse.
If you can figure out a way to make it worse,
too.
GMless games have come up a couple of times in conversation, and it reminded me there was a conversation on the server of, can a game be GMless? Is there always someone that's facilitating the game? And I think that GMless games are really like changing how we think about role-playing games, because the traditional thought is there's someone leading the game and everyone else is following, and those GMless games really bring in a new level of improv. And so I don't have a fully cohesive question about this, but I'd love to hear thoughts on GMless games and how they're kind of changing what we do with gaming.
I feel like GMless games are awesome. And like I was saying, I love changing the power dynamic at the table, which I think ultimately makes games less oppositional, where you feel like the players and the GM are fighting, not just the characters and the scenario. At the same time, I think GMless games work better for certain genres of story than others. Great for slice of life. It's not so good when there needs to be like an escalating conflict and a resolution, a climax and resolution. But having said that, it's also something that has a huge design space to explore in, and maybe somebody will figure out how, or it has already, and I'm just not up on it, you know, how to make that really work. Well, like, Becky, you were talking about Lovecraft-esque, right? Is that GMless?
Yes, but it's not really got the escalation, that sort of cadence of conflict in the same way. It has mechanics which map the traditional cosmic horror arc. So it rises to a crescendo, and then you have a reveal of the final horror, and it's all kind of built up in that way. And it has sort of mechanized, I suppose to extent that, but it doesn't have the kind of a D&D, we're off on a party, we're going to fight a big bad, yay, now we're doing something else, now we're going to fight another one. Yeah, it doesn't have that kind of cadence to it.
And horror often doesn't, so, you know, it's good.
But I think you're absolutely right that there is, it's the right tool for the right job, isn't it? There are games where I think GMless games work better than traditional games or GM'd games, and there are games where everything works less well.
Don't you hate those moments when you get an idea? Sorry, I've just got an idea. I just need to write something down.
It's not your
just
face,
1 minute.
Newman.
I just went, what? Okay, brain, go. Right, sorry, 1 sec.
I'll give Newman a moment.
This is going to be great.
Everyone look out for the flying halberd.
We'll just all stay here. It's total silence.
Yeah.
You just stare at Newman. It's okay.
Okay, I think I've got it down.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
Cool.
Okay,
I've got enough.
Good. Well, now I've lost my train of thought, Newman. No, it's okay. I got it back just now. So are there any systems that you lean in to more for being more improv friendly? Can you improv with anything, or are there some things that are more improv friendly?
What kind of things?
Go, Chris.
Sorry,
like
go ahead.
Systems or yeah.
I was going to say OSR style games tend to give me a lot of freedom for improv. One that I've been really vibing with lately is like Pirate Board from Limithron, where everything comes down to a random dice roll. Your character's probably going to die 3 to 4 times in a 4-hour session. And because of that, you're constantly adapting. You're constantly, hey, here's a new person that just showed up. How did they happen to get there? I thought we were alone in this cave. And I've been leaning a lot more into the OSR games lately, so that's probably why it's fresh on my mind that instead of having a set A plus B has to make C, it can be whatever you want. You could be a pirate wearing full conquistador plate that you just happened to find on a ship one day, and then 2 rounds later you find yourself drowning because you botched a roll. And then you got to bring yourself back in as a new person and say, okay, who am I now? So the high turnover, I feel like, gives a lot of fun for improv, both from the GM side and the player side, because the GM has to find a way to work in this new character who was totally there the whole time. And then the player has to say, okay, I've completely changed my identity from this guy who had scurvy and open sores to now I'm a chain-smoking person who wants to punt a monkey.
So I would say Call of Cthulhu is my jam. It's what I tend to play most of the time, but there are a few other games, and I would say, and I know I'm spoilt and perhaps at one end of the scale at this, I'm very lucky working, with the Playhouse and with the wonderful people that I get to play with and things. And, a lot of the time where I find myself in a game and we are improvising, it's because of a lot of the starter things we've talked about today. Those journeys have been taken by a lot of the people that I play with. So I'm playing with kind of trusted and experienced role players and improvisers. And I really like actually, we're getting really into these characters. Vampire the Masquerade, I love being in that, and I love really kind of playing out those characters because you can create such a rich history from nowhere and interweave it because the characters have been alive for not alive, but they've been around for so long. There's other things. I think Vassin as well is another great one for building relationships because there's kind of significant things that your character has, like a secret and a trait and a this, and I really like those in a panel earlier. In fact, it was Graham said it, and Graham ran The Walking Dead for me a while ago with a couple of guys over at the Nook, and it was great. It was really cool. I didn't actually know those guys that well. I knew one or two of them. Obviously, I know Graham well, but Graham was running it, and each of the characters had their own little secret. And it was a preordained kind of thing within the character sheets, a bit like in Alien when you're trying to work out who's either working for the company or who's the android kind of thing. And in The Walking Dead, it was really cool, very similar, same system, Mutant Zero thing, but you each had this little secret, and it just worked really well. But as much as I love those moments where it does go a bit silly, I love improvising, and it's actually like, some good drama going on. It's a bit like, this is wicked. I'm really into this. I'm really enjoying it. Again, those moments can be, few and far between. It takes time to kind of build up to that. I'm not saying that I'm really good at it, but what I'm saying is I'm lucky enough to be involved in some of those moments. I think if we're talking about the scale there, it does take time to build up with a bunch of people to get to that level. But it is really exciting when you do.
Oh, I think you're so right. And I think this kind of reminds me of something which I think is really key, which is having people who are all on the same page. Improv works best when you've got a bunch of people who are all interested in telling the same sort of story, whether that is a deep emotional drama or a high political fantasy. It will absolutely die in a ditch if you have somebody who has turned up to the table, and this is a completely legitimate way to play a role-playing game. They've turned up to the table because what they get turned on by is hard, tactical play. What they want is to have a series of abilities and a series of powers and equipment, and they want to be given a very, very tight scenario, and they want to very, very cleverly and rightly, like a puzzle, take what they've got and make it work against the scenario. And there may be some people out there who could satisfyingly improv GM that for them, but I don't think that would be me. I could not satisfyingly effectively run a war game in an improv way, because what they have turned up to the table is to experience something which has maybe a little bit of role playing, but which is ultimately a very well crafted strategic challenge. And that's, absolutely legitimate, but don't try improving skeleton stat blocks at the table if somebody is here for that puzzle challenge. So I think really it's about setting expectations. What are we here to do? okay, well, improv's going to work with that. It's not going to work with that. We'll lean less into the improv this time because we're basically playing Warhammer 40k hard mode. Actually, over here, we've got some people who want to play a telenovela, so we're just going to play Passion de Passionales and do lots of improv with that, and that's going to be cool. But yeah, so it's really, who are you playing with? What are they here for? And let's make sure we deliver it. There used to be something called the Same Page tool. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. I can't remember if you can even get it now, which was like a questionnaire that the players would fill out and the GM would fill out to make sure that everybody was on the same page about what the game was going to be delivering. And for me, that's just like, that's your starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, also a cat's talk. I think it's like concept, aim, tone, and subject matter.
Yeah.
Does that too. Yeah, I can really, although it's not collaborative, right? The GM writes it and says, okay, this is what I've got. If you want this, play my game. Otherwise, don't. But there's probably a way to collaborate on that.
So, I'm a player that's new to improvising. This is not me personally. This is a hypothetical me. Have only run pre-written scenarios that I have fully prepped, and I get my players from the beginning to the end and keep them on track because we're telling the story that's on the page. But I want to start incorporating more improvising into my games. I want to improvise a little bit more. How do I start? Where do I start?
Becky mentioned expectations. Sorry, Doc, I'll be super quick. I just think having generous expectations of yourself. Told you I'll be quick.
Definitely don't be afraid to give yourself grace on that, because as we've said earlier, I mean, Becky, you nailed it saying improv is a muscle. If you're not going to walk out, put up 4 plates on a deadlift and walk away from that. But one thing I did to get into improv more is I would be running established adventures, but then start adding my own little flair to them. Less so they have to go to this location to get this exact thing. I said, what if that thing wasn't there? Where else could I put that elsewhere? And then how do I get them to there? How do I help them get to there in my own way? And one of the biggest things, I was running Curse of Strahd for a bunch of fellow faculty out here, and about halfway through I realized I didn't like where it was going in the book. I know it's sacrilege to speak ill of such a highly regarded module, but I realized it wasn't hitting the notes they wanted. So I looked to a few actual places. Well, they kind of did something like this. I could do something like that. Put in a brand new subplot, killed one of the player characters off, and just basically started it again halfway through. And it was so much more satisfying to know that I wasn't just reading, because in D&D, anybody who's running those, they give you the box and say, read this exactly as it says to your players. I hated that. I said, well, I want that room to be black instead of gray. I want this person to be to the left instead of the right. And just those little changes led to me then revamping the entire module and getting a much more interesting thing out of it, because I let the players lead it, less of what the book was leading me.
Yeah, I think this ties into what Rina was saying about not being invested in a single ending. You have maybe a bullet point, that describes it in general, but if somebody's just starting out as an improvisational keeper, I think Rina's advice is really good.
I would attack it very slightly differently, although I agree with everything that has gone before. I would say that there are some excellent GM-less games out there now which will teach you how to do it, first off, that will give you a scaffolding, that will give you mechanics, which will give you a very easy on-ramp into doing it. But what I also love about GM-less games is that they often have a rotating GM seat. So they're not really GM-less, they're GM full. Everybody gets to GM a couple of scenes. But if everybody around the table is GMing a couple of scenes, then it's really going to take the heat off you, because everybody's got some skin in the game. And you are not going to sit there feeling like, oh God, if this fails, then it's me, it's all on me, because, your scene might go brilliantly and your mate's scene might crash and burn. But because everybody's got that skin in the game, and the game is holding your hand with the mechanics and the strategy, and the scaffolding for it, is a really safe space to experiment and get a bit of your confidence up for a one shot. And I would always say as well, improvise. If you want to start an improvisational journey, do it in a one shot. So if it crashes and burns, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
So-
the skin of the game is great. I just think as a
No.
principle to say that the story belongs to everybody equally at the table, that I think sets a GM's mindset from the beginning, their expectations to be like, everybody, I'm going to pass the ball around a lot. It's not just going to be me, speaking half the time.
Yeah. And me personally, as someone who, doesn't run like full improv games, I think my comfort level is knowing what's happening. So what is the overarching plot? What's the bad guy doing? And having a really well thought out first act. Because that's where I can build comfort and find out how my players are acting, and then have a little less structured notes second act. And then knowing by third act, I'm not going to know what's going to happen, but that I can get us there. And there's comfort in the first act, but by the second and third, you kind of know who your players are a little bit more, and and then you're feeling more comfortable too, because that starting a scenario is sometimes the most nerve-wracking thing when you're running a game. But so last night I messaged Rina, and they were very kind to me and said that if we got through all of my questions, which we have in a roundabout way, and we've touched on all of them, that they would lead us in a 10-minute, like a quick improv scene. My improv.
Yes,
my
Rina.
improv, yes. My improv. I'm trying to think of it, the correct Regency. Honorific for Rina. And so what do you need from us?
Okay, Miranda, I want you to give me a setting.
Oh, a setting? The 1950s, because we were just talking about
1950s.
dames in the YouTube chat.
Okay, 1950s. All right. Newman, I want you to give me a time of year.
Winter.
Winter. Okay, Doc, urban or rural?
Urban.
Urban. Okay. Okay. All right. So, Becky, home or office setting?
Or home.
Home. Okay. Chris, friends or family?
Family.
Family. All right. So you have all gathered together in winter at the family home. You are all adults. It is a holiday. Let's say it's winter, so it's Christmas. You're getting together for a very awkward Christmas. And there is a family secret that you are all starting to learn about. You haven't quite figured out what it is, but you all know that there is something very, very wrong in your family. And the family patriarch, Mike, has been dancing around this issue for this entire Christmas holiday session. You've been here for a couple days now. It is now Christmas Eve, and you're all sitting around the dinner table, awkwardly eating your dinner. So, Newman. Mike, the patriarch, looks at you. What is your relationship to Mike?
Mike, I've always felt like I could be better at leading this family than Mike. I've always felt like Mike is a bit soft with everybody. He needs to tell these others just what he really thinks of them, like really what they're like.
So are you like his younger brother or like his son?
Yeah, sure. I am his younger brother.
All right.
What's your name?
My name is Mike. No, Ted. No, my name is I'm gonna go with Francis.
Francis. Okay. I just made a character named Francis. That's funny. All right. Francis, you have some nerve coming here after what you did.
Well, you have some nerve serving this food. Have you seen the state of it? I mean, is this a gathering or is this a funeral? What the hell's going on?
Jello salad is all the rage now.
Well, I think you'll find that it's the red Jello that people are enjoying, whereas the green one has been recalled. And this Mike is green.
Not as
What's
green as
in
old
this?
Goldie.
What's suspended in this Jello salad? It looks just disturbingly familiar.
As you look closer into this Jello salad, you realize you're seeing fingernails floating, wriggling, jiggling in the Jello salad.
Are they little coconut kind of? Is that coconut? Doesn't look like coconut, does it?
Is coconut this crunchy?
It's not usually this crunchy. Has anybody seen Aunt Susan?
Susan's
Oh,
had a
how?
long illness. She won't be available today.
Oh,
I hope she's feeling better. I wanted to say hi to her.
I hadn't talked to her in weeks.
Somebody better fill my wine glass up right now. This food is disgusting.
The jello's not that bad, Uncle Frank.
Thank you.
Becky, the wine has an unfamiliar scent. You smell the wine, you smell blackberries and currants and all these things, but there's something under it that's bitter. It's really deep, bitter scent.
Everything just tastes foul today. Maybe it's the company.
Maybe it's the company.
Well, it can't have gone bad because that's Mom's wine, and I mean, if she opens a bottle, she drinks it that day. Probably that morning, or probably a couple bottles. So it hasn't been sitting out for long.
Maybe it's from the basement. That cash she left down there. It was some sort of something fancy down there. She always talked about she was going to bust it out for special occasions. Maybe she didn't open it.
You know what? I'm just going to go down and get a new bottle.
Yeah, get two. Might as well. I think
Yeah,
Mike's splashing out here. So, Mike, what the hell is this all about? Why are we all gathered here for Jello with coconut shavings and piss poor wine?
I think you know why we're here, Francis. Don't you have a big announcement to make?
I do have a big announcement to make. I'm taking over the family business.
What?
About
Mike
time.
has, I would say, gracefully stepped aside, but we have maneuvered somewhat behind his back and behind all of your backs, so there was little interference. But please have it known that your interests are my interests, and I am determined to see interests rise, unlike my brother Mike, who was happy to just do whatever Dad wanted with his merry whims and not actually run a business. Mike, I'm assuming you knew about this. I didn't think you did. Bravo.
Oh, well, Miranda, what's your character's name?
Oh, my character's name is Gilbert.
Gilbert told me all about it, Francis.
Oh, Gilbert.
I couldn't betray Dad's trust. Francis.
Gilbert, when I brought you in, the first thing I said to you was, we will need to betray your father's trust. The first thing I said to you, Gilbert.
Yeah.
Not to betray his trust, to hurt him, but to protect him, to protect all of you.
And I tried as hard as I could, but he knew. Somehow I don't know how he knew, but he did.
It's like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it, Gilbert?
But I can still have a job after college, right? Aunt Susan said you'd give me a job.
Oh, honestly.
Susan's mind has gotten kind of moist lately. It's that long illness. She promises a lot of things.
Have you seen my grades? I was relying on this. Uncle Frank, come on.
Well,
Chris, you feel something wrapping itself around your ankle. As you say that, Susan's mind has gone moist. You feel something cold and clammy grabbing around your ankle.
Is there something physically there, or is it just my
It
mind?
looks like a hand has risen up out of the floorboards, this cold, clammy hand, and wrapped itself around you, and it's starting to pull.
Some of Aunt Susan's promises are inexorable and just hard to shake.
The hell are you talking about?
Aunt Susan, not
Way
now.
over there. Susan's not here. She's
She
home at the
might
long
be in the wine cellar.
Look, would everybody get themselves together? Look, Susan had to go for this to actually happen. Just pull yourselves together.
What do you mean
Just whoever's
Susan had
getting
to
the wine
go?
downstairs, be careful.
I meant for her continuing ill health, Gilbert, is what I meant. That she had to go. I mean, it doesn't hurt that she's gone and now things can move forward with the business. But are
Gone-
you okay? You're kicking
gone
under
but
the
not
table. What are
forgotten.
you doing?
It's Aunt Susan.
I'm gonna whip open the under the table and have a look at what the hell he's doing. Is he playing footsie with someone? What's going on?
You look under the table and you see that there's a hand wrapped around their ankle. A fingernail-less hand, cold, clammy, and blue. And there's a second hand reaching out towards Becky's character's ankle, reaching, clutching.
Oh, do I like Becky's
there it
character?
goes. Do you?
I'm just going to
I've
step
only
away
ever
from the
supported
table.
you, Francis.
Oh, absolutely. Becky, over here for a second, please. And I'm going to just take one step away from the table. I have probably gone completely, absolutely pale and like rigid.
I'll scurry round to your side of the table and say, we should get some champagne.
Yes, quite. Let's just step over here for a second. And I just kind of, I suppose, just turn Becky a little bit now. We've stepped further away. Do we have that visual angle where we might see something under the table?
You see a woman's figure, an elderly woman wearing this flower print smock dress, sort of floating up, almost up from under the floorboards, her hands outstretched, one grasping, reaching, clawing where Becky's ankle used to be, and the other one still clinging for dear unlife onto Chris's ankle, and just holding on tight and pulling and pulling and pulling, and her eyes are missing. Because you know where you put them, Francis. You know where you put her eyes. But she's looking with the absence of her eyes as if desperately seeking something, and she opens her mouth as she floats up through the floor as if she's calling out, Francis!
I'll just scream, "Stop staring at me! Otherwise I'll have to kill you again!"
And I think that's the perfect time to wrap up our scene and wrap up our panel as well. So I'll just have our panelists go around again in the same order that we did last time and let people know if they want to find more of you, hear more from you, where they can find you. And then that'll be it for our Yes and Improv panel. So we'll start with Becky.
I've been Becky Annison. You can find me on Twitter at Becky Annison, or on what's the other thing, Blue Sky. But also, if you go to blackarmadagames.com, you can find me there too.
And Chris?
I'm Chris. You can find me at Hectic Electron everywhere. I'm on Blue Sky and Tumblr, and at hecticelectron.com.
Matt?
I'm Matt, but my friends call me Doc. I'm on Discord, Dr. Bones 412. On pretty much every Discord I can conceivably think of, much to my own lack of control there. You can find the things I've written on Miskatonic Repository. Please check them out. I've got one scenario closing in on Silver. It's called Ghost Trade, so please check it out. It was my latest scenario, and I got another one coming out hopefully in a month or two.
Newman?
I am T.A. Newman, and you can find me on MySpace. Also, you can find me on just TA Newman on all the socials. But the Miskatonic Playhouse is where you'll find me, and on the Discord server, come and have a chat. Couple of scenarios out there. You're very welcome to have a look at them. I'm always happy to talk about them because I think they're cool because I wrote them, and that's kind of what it is. Hopefully, a campaign book coming out in the near future, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, awesome.
I've been meaning to talk to you about your live journal, but we'll save that for later. Rina.
And I'm Rina Haenze. You can find me on Discords pretty much everywhere, including the Miskatonic Playhouse Discord server as Reena, or the Inevitable Reena in a lot of places. You can find my scenarios on DriveThruRPG, including the gold best-selling Saturday the 14th, which is a Friday the 13th sequel, spiritual sequel, I'd like to say. And I have a new scenario starring 1950s mobsters coming out later this month. You can also find me on the Old Ways podcast, Ain't Slayed Nobody, occasionally on Symphony Entertainment, the Miskatonic Playhouse, How We Roll, and a few other places. But if you'd like to talk to me, please message me here on Discord. I'm not on Twitter anymore. But you can find me here. I'm always happy to talk about horror, improv, my games, other people's games, all sorts of things.
And I'm Miranda. I've been your moderator. You can find me most places as Don't Stop Me Now. I'm also a cast member and storyteller over on the Old Ways podcast. And you've been a wonderful group of panelists. And I hope everyone's had a good con and continues to have a good con. Or if you're watching this in the future on a recorded YouTube video, I hope you join us for the next one. Thanks, everyone.